We got gay pastor gets humbled by a real pastor. Let's get to it.
To
Covering
overthrow
in
the
a decade
consistent
of
testimony.
research into the ancient Greco-Roman world and into
Son,
the
I was
context
studying
of
this
Leviticus.
stuff when you were still in diapers. Don't give me your 10-year stuff.
You're about to watch what happens when a gay pastor goes head to head with a seasoned Christian theologian on one of the most controversial issues in our society, LGBTQ. Now, about an hour into the debate, they start exploring the Bible stance on same-sex relations, and that's when things really start to break down for the gay
External
pastor.
sources.
I'm going to let this one play out, and then I'm going to give my thoughts and break down on the back end. Let's get into it.
You said earlier that you're the one dealing with the text. Everyone's spinning it. I would like to, if we can, in the few minutes we have left,
Yes.
I want to understand Kai Hasan koimethe meta arsenos koitain gunaikos. There's just a small number of words here. Let's see if we can actually agree.
Okay.
Whoever koimethe lies with an arsenos, and then koitain, of course, is coitus. This is to get into bed so as to have coitus, as with a gunaikos. Now,
We agree on this, James.
okay, are you saying so? Are you saying that there's anything in this text that limits this prohibition so it does not include, where do you get loving, monogamous, same-sex coitain? Where does that come from?
So this is where I do accuse you all of not doing good hermeneutics. You're taking one verse, breaking down the words and saying, look, there's nothing here. It just simply says, man, don't lie together as you do with a woman. If you take the verse out of that context and just read it as you did it, I would say, yes, that sounds like a broad condemnation of all gay sex.
Okay, but before you go on, I just want to make sure. Is there anything in the Hebrew? Because I was just looking at the Greek Septuagint because more people do that.
No, we agree.
Would
on
you
this
agree?
thing.
So you'd
We
agree that the technical terms are used for male and female. All that stuff is right there in the text, and are we actually agreeing on something?
This is not. I don't know why this is surprising.
Yay! Okay, I don't know. I just
agree.
figured in this hour that would be something. It would be somewhat of a historical event. So we agree on that, and your argument is that there's something else.
That's
in
a
the
literary
context.
and cultural context of Leviticus 18 places the behavior that's being described in verse 22 outside of the behavior that I'm talking about when I look at my congregation that has LGBT people in them and perform their weddings and encourage them to be in loving, committed relationships, because the context of ancient Egypt and Canaan did not have loving, consensual same-sex relations.
Okay, hold on a second. So the law that was given by Moses can only be relevant in the ancient world where you know Canaanite and Egyptian religion and can have no application to today, which would mean that Paul completely blew it when he interpreted these words in the New Testament.
It can have application. I think it should have application. I think it's against exploitative sexual relationships.
But there's nothing we agreed on what the text was. It is specifically talking about a man getting in bed to have coitus with a man rather than in the fashion of a woman. And so, and you agree.
That must be asked by any good biblical scholar is, where in the ancient world, in Canaan and Egypt, was that taking place?
So
where the evidence we have of men lying with men as with women in ancient Canaan and Egypt generally is either exploitative sexual practices or pagan idolatrous sexual practices.
So you're saying that you're actually saying that there were no loving homosexual relationships in the ancient world in Canaan or Egypt.
That's not what I said. Not the ancient world. I said in Canaan and Egypt. Yes,
there were none.
You know this.
I didn't say there were none.
Well, but it's still prohibited whether there's only, because you earlier said, well, it's only 5%, so why would Jesus have addressed this? So you're using the minimalization
what was
thing
much more
here.
common? No, see, you're twisting my own argument to try to win your point. The point is, what was very
we're asking
common,
we're asking your position.
No, you're telling me my position and then having me respond to what you've articulated my position to be. Here's the thing. We know that in ancient Canaan and ancient Egypt, it was very prevalent for men to have sex with men of higher status to have sex with men of lower status, men who had enslaved other cultures and people from other surrounding nations were able to have sex with their male slaves. That was a very common practice. So it makes logical sense.
And it was perversion, right?
Yes, that is perversion.
Was it only the exploitative element that made it perversion? Or is it the fact?
I didn't hear what you said. Please repeat.
Was it only the exploitative element that made it perversion? Or is it not clear that in verse 13 of Leviticus 20, the issue is the twisting of creation between the zakar and the isha? It's the technical. It's the changing of the created order. Isn't that exactly Paul's application in Romans chapter 1 when he doesn't talk about exploitative relationships? He says men lusting after men. That's reciprocal. You can't say that's one man lusting after someone who doesn't want to be lusted after. This was a reciprocal relationship in Romans chapter 1.
I disagree. And
Okay, why?
Because Romans chapter 1, again, the context of all of Romans 1, Paul is describing the descent of humanity into godlessness. And Paul begins with, they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, worship created things instead of the creator God. He goes down and explains how idolatry leads to this perverted sexual practice. In my understanding,
like men having sex with men, women having sex with women.
Yes, the sex that's taking place there is in relation to the idolatry,
which Paul calls sexual immorality idolatry, whether it's heterosexual or homosexual. If it's sexually immoral, it's idolatrous.
So why do you not see then that the example that's being given by the apostle here, I know what you're trying to say. I think what you're trying to say is this is only relevant to idolaters. But the problem is the example of Romans 1 is this is a twisting of the creation-creator relationship, even down to the point where when it says even their women exchanged the natural for that which is against nature.
I do agree that it seems the most likely reading of Romans 1 is that the context of that sexual behavior is related to Greco-Roman idolatry. Now, the other side that I'm also willing to concede is that I do believe Paul has a patriarchal worldview. Paul believes the created order is fundamentally patriarchal. I reject that. I believe that the reason Paul would believe that homosexual sex is sinful is because it's a man emasculating another man. It's threatening the patriarchal ordering of society. I think that's a worldview Paul inherits from his culture. I don't believe that's the divine ordering of the world. I don't believe that that's the right ordering of the world.
But you don't really know, though, because from the start of this conversation, you said you don't really think you can know what that objective standard is. So you're making ethical claims against patriarchy and all the rest, and I don't really know what you mean by that. I probably would want to get to know you more and ask you what you mean, so I wouldn't want to misrepresent you. But we started this conversation with you admitting that because you've rejected Scripture at the reference point, you don't really know that there's any objective standard, so you're really just guessing.
No, see, Jeff, you continue to misrepresent me from the
I'm dealing with your epistemology. I'm not misrepresenting you. Anybody, listen, one last thing. Anybody's going to be able to take their finger and scroll back to the beginning of the conversation where you've abandoned. I didn't say, no, hold on now. I'm saying that you, on ethics, are saying that you're not sure, you don't really know if there's a subjective standard, maybe that's possible to get to it, and yet, here we go, and yet you still continue